People saying it's get back. People saying a bunch of things. Going on.
Do you remember the day Los Angeles froze? When one name, Nipsey Hussle, became both a legend and a curse. Years later, that same name would echo through the streets again. But this time, it wasn't about music or legacy or victory. It was about revenge, or at least that's what everyone thought. Halloween night 2025. A man steps out of a car under the orange glow of South Figaro's streetlights. Within seconds, gunfire breaks the silence. The target, Jabari Baby Y Henley, the son of LA icon Big U, drops to the ground. And when his killer is caught, the words he says shake the city all over again. I did it for Nipsey. But here's the thing. What if it wasn't revenge at all? What if this was the final move in a betrayal that began over a decade ago? A story buried under loyalty, street politics, and digital lies. Because behind the headlines, behind the courtroom confession, lies a darker truth about fame, power, and how online conspiracies can twist real lives. This is the story of Big U Nipsey Hussle and the murder that reignited Los Angeles' oldest feud. And once you hear what really happened, you'll never look at the word loyalty the same way again.
He was super cool, bro. Hilarious and just had good vibes. Unfortunately, his son got shot and killed outside a smoke shop in the Hoover territory.
Halloween night, 2025. South Los Angeles is alive, music echoing from cars, laughter spilling out of corner stores, and the hum of traffic along Figueroa. But just after 11 p.m., that rhythm stops. Witnesses later said it happened too fast to even process. A gray Dodge Charger pulled up outside the Sunset Smoke Shop, right on the corner of West 69th Street and South Figueroa, a block locals call The Blade. A voice shouted a name, Jabari! Then came the flash of a gun. Within seconds, Jabari Baby Y Henley, the 34-year-old son of Eugene Big U Henley, was lying motionless on the sidewalk. He'd been hit multiple times at close range. Police arrived within minutes, tried CPR, but it was too late. Jabari was pronounced dead before he reached the hospital. The LAPD called it a targeted attack. But they didn't name suspects. They didn't give a motive. They didn't explain how someone could pull off a killing like this in one of the city's most watched neighborhoods. That silence, it lit a fire online. Within hours, dire justice for Baby Y was trending. Podcasts like No Jumper broke the news, their voices heavy with disbelief. How could this happen to the son of Big U, one of the most powerful men to ever come out of South Central? And as the internet scrambled for answers, the streets whispered something else entirely. That this wasn't random. That someone had waited years for this moment. But that was only the beginning, because when word of Jabari's death reached Big U, sitting behind bars on federal RICO charges, the story of grief, betrayal, and revenge was about to explode. But to understand why his murder shook Los Angeles to its core, you have to understand who Big U really was, and how his shadow stretched over everything that came next.
That whole down to, like, you feel me, to the 60s, where unfortunately, I think this was at like 67th and Fig.
It said 69.
69, okay. So
Before the hashtags, before the headlines, before the courtroom confessions, there was Eugene Big U Henley. To some, he was a legend. To others, a threat. But in Los Angeles, everyone knew his name. Big U wasn't just another figure from South Central. He was South Central. A former Rollins 60s Crip who turned his street power into influence, respect, and eventually, an empire. In the early 2000s, he made a transformation few thought possible, pivoting from gang life to the music industry. Through his label, Unique Records, he helped shape LA's hip-hop sound. He gave opportunities to rising artists who'd later become icons, names like Corrupt, Ice Cube, and most famously, Nipsey Hussle. For a time, Big U wasn't just a manager. He was the gatekeeper between the streets and success. But power in Los Angeles comes with a price. As Big U's reputation grew, so did the rumors. accusations of intimidation, check-ins, and money moving behind the scenes. To the city, he was a paradox, a man who preached peace and unity, while his name was whispered in the same breath as fear and control. Then came the RICO case. In 2025, federal prosecutors painted Big U as the architect of a sprawling criminal network. Extortion, gang ties, even links to violence. Whether those charges were truth or exaggeration didn't matter. The damage was done. By the time he was locked up, the myth of Big U had already become bigger than the man himself. So when his son was gunned down on Halloween night, the city didn't just see a murder, they saw karma. Online forums lit up with phrases like poetic justice and revenge for Nipsey. The streets divided, half mourning, half celebrating. But inside the Metropolitan Detention Center, none of that mattered. Big U sat in silence, a father stripped of power, a man forced to watch his own son die through the same violence he'd spent a lifetime trying to control. And that was the cruelest part. Because for Big U, this wasn't just a loss, it was a reflection. Everything he'd built, every decision he'd made was now collapsing in front of him. Yet the city wasn't done writing the story. Because as everyone debated Big U's legacy, another question started rising louder than the gunshots that took his son's life. Who was Jabari Baby Wee Henley? And what kind of life was he really living before that Halloween night?
You could look up all the murders in Los Angeles, that there's certain places right now that are not cool to hang out with out here. These places are hot.
To understand the heartbreak behind that night, you have to know who Jabari Baby Wee Henley really was. Born in 1991, Jabari grew up surrounded by both privilege and danger. His father, Big U, was already a giant in Los Angeles, feared in the streets, respected in the boardrooms. That meant Jabari had access to two worlds most people never touched. One filled with opportunity, and the other with risk. Friends described him as disciplined, loyal, and funny. The kind of person who could walk into any room and light it up. He had the swagger of his father, but the heart of a dreamer. Jabari wasn't trying to escape his father's shadow. He wanted to reshape it. Through Unique Records, the same label that once helped launch Nipsey Hussle's early career, Jabari tried to rebuild the company's image, to make it something legitimate, something clean. He managed young artists, organized showcases, and even started talking about expanding beyond LA. To his friends, this was a man finally finding his lane. But the streets don't forget names like Henley. And no matter how far Jabari tried to run from his father's past, that legacy followed him. Old ties, old enemies, old rumors. They all came back. In 2021, Jabari was briefly named a person of interest in the Las Vegas murder of rapper Lil RW, a case that went cold but resurfaced years later during Big U's federal indictment. Jabari was never charged, but in the public eye, the stain was permanent. The whispers grew. He's just like his father. Yet those closest to him insisted he was changing. On social media, you could see the shift. Less nightlife, more family, more business. He posted about his son, his team, and the future. For once, it seemed like he was breaking free. That's why his death hit so hard. When news broke, tributes poured in from across LA, rappers, athletes, even city leaders. But none were more emotional than the one from his younger brother, Deshawn Henley, a linebacker for the Los Angeles Chargers. Hours after hearing about Jabari's death during a game, Deshawn wrote, "2025 brought me more pain than joy. I got us, big bro. Don't even worry about it. I love you. Allah blessed me with even one more night with my big brother. You forever with me." The post went viral. Millions of likes, thousands of comments, and a wave of heartbreak from fans who saw two brothers walking opposite roads. One made it to the NFL. The other was gunned down on the same streets their father once ruled. It was a tragic contrast. Success and struggle, fame and fatality, all in the same bloodline. But in Los Angeles, nothing stays private for long. Because while one family mourned, Another name began circulating, the name of a man police said might have been behind it all. And when he was finally caught, what he said next would shake the entire city. It didn't take long for Los Angeles to get its answer. Just a week after Jabari's murder, police pulled over a gray Dodge Charger during a traffic stop in Compton. The driver seemed calm, almost too calm. But when officers searched the car, they found a Glock 17 tucked under the passenger seat, its serial number filed off. Ballistics later confirmed what many feared. It was the same gun used to kill Jabari Baby Y Henley. The suspect's name was Deshawn Lil Price Walters, a 27-year-old from South LA. On paper, he was just another young man with a record. But what made him infamous wasn't the weapon, it was the words that came out of his mouth when detectives read him his rights. "I did it for Nipsey." That single sentence sent shockwaves through the city. Within hours, "And for Nipsey" was trending again, but this time, not in celebration. It was confusion, outrage, disbelief. Why would someone kill Big U's son years after Nipsey Hussle's death? What connection could there possibly be? Months later, at the Los Angeles Superior Court, the truth came spilling out. The courtroom was silent as Deshawn Walters stood before Judge Maria Lopez, gripping the podium with shaking hands. He'd already been convicted of first-degree murder, but before sentencing, he wanted to speak. "I know what I did was wrong," he said, his voice cracking. "I know I took a life, but I need everyone to understand. I did it for Nipsey. Big U took someone we all loved. He took hope from us, and his son, he carried that same name. I thought I was balancing the scales." Gasps filled the room. Some cried, others shouted. Dion Henley dropped his head into his hands. On a screen streaming from the Metropolitan Detention Center, Big U's face appeared expressionless, staring into the eyes of the man who had just admitted to killing his son. Walters went on, almost pleading. "Nipsey was more than a rapper. He was the only one telling us we could be better. When he died, I blamed Big U. I thought I was doing what Nip would have wanted, but I was wrong. He never wanted this." Judge Lopez's eyes didn't move. When it was her turn to speak, her words cut like a blade. To invoke Nipsey Hussle's name while committing murder is the ultimate betrayal of his legacy. You haven't honored him. You've dishonored everything he stood for. She sentenced Walters to 35 years to life, calling the act a tragedy born from misinformation and misplaced loyalty. As guards led Walters away, he turned back one last time. "I'm sorry to everyone, and especially to Jabari's family. I was lost." But apologies don't resurrect the dead. And outside that courtroom, the city was divided once again. Some saw justice, others saw prophecy fulfilled. Yet for those who truly knew Nipsey, for those who understood his message of peace and empowerment, one haunting question remained. How could a man inspired by his legacy become the very thing Nipsey fought against? To answer that, you have to trace the roots of the hate, the whispers, the rumors, and the digital conspiracies that turned grief into vengeance. For years, Los Angeles had lived with an uneasy silence, a silence filled with whispers, accusations, and half-truths about who was really to blame for Nipsey Hussle's death. The official story was clear. Eric Holder pulled the trigger in 2019. But for the streets, for the fans, the blogs, and the conspiracy pages, that wasn't enough. They wanted someone bigger, someone responsible. And slowly, the rumors began to point toward one man, Big U. It started small, a few YouTube videos, a Reddit thread, a couple of cryptic tweets. But then, it spread like wildfire. Every podcast, every comment section, every barbershop conversation began circling the same question. Was Big U involved? Theories piled up fast. Some said he orchestrated Nipsey's murder. Others claimed he betrayed him. None of it was ever proven, but online proof didn't matter. Once a rumor catches fire, it becomes reality for those who want to believe it. That's where Deshawn Walters came in. According to prosecutors, Walters spent years obsessing over those theories. He followed every blog, every interview, every unverified leak. He joined online groups where people dissected Nipsey's lyrics like scripture, twisting lines into coded messages about Big U. It was more than fandom. It was faith turned toxic. Psychologists later described it as conspiratorial radicalization, a slow burn of anger fed by social media until reality blurs with fiction. In private messages recovered from Walters' phone, he told friends, "Someone's got to make Big U pay." He believed he was avenging Nipsey. He believed he was a hero. And that's the terrifying part, because everything he acted on came from lies. Even after Eric Holder's conviction, people still clung to the myth that Big U had set things in motion. They ignored the evidence. They ignored the facts. The internet had built its own reality, one that was louder, faster, and far more seductive. By the time Jabari Henley was murdered, that narrative had been brewing for nearly a decade. To many online, it didn't even feel like a crime. It felt like closure. But the truth was far uglier. Walters didn't know Big U. He didn't know Jabari. He didn't even know Nipsey personally. What he did know was the endless loop of anger and misinformation that had consumed his timeline for years, until he decided to turn a rumor into an act of violence. And that's how a digital lie became a real-life tragedy. But this didn't start with Walters. The roots of that hate go deeper, back to the early 2000s when two men built an empire together and then tore it apart. Because to understand how conspiracy became conviction, you have to go back to where it all began. Big U and Nipsey Hussle, mentor and student, brothers in ambition, divided by betrayal. Before the rumors, before the fallout, before the word betrayal started circulating through South Central, there was loyalty. Back in the mid-2000s, Nipsey Hussle was still a hungry young rapper from Crenshaw trying to find his voice. He had talent, vision, and drive, but no path into an industry that rarely opened doors for men from his block. That's when Big U stepped in. To Nipsey, Big U was more than a manager. He was the blueprint, the man who'd survived the streets, earned respect, and turned his reputation into power. Big U gave him studio time, connections, protection, everything an up-and-coming artist needed to move through Los Angeles safely. Their partnership looked unbreakable, but behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Money disputes, creative control, pride. By 2010, Nipsey was becoming his own man, building a following, shaping a movement that no longer needed a gatekeeper. For Big U, who'd invested years into Nip's rise, it felt like betrayal. And then came what people in LA still whisper about, the parking lot confrontation. It happened in 2012 near Crenshaw and Slauson. Witnesses say voices were raised, words were exchanged, and Nipsey made one thing clear: he wanted out. He wanted full control of his career, free from any street ties or old-world obligations. For Big U, that was unforgivable. After that day, everything changed. Nipsey walked away and built all money in, refusing major label deals, refusing to play by anyone's rules but his own. He sold his Crenshaw mixtape for $100 a copy, a move that would become hip-hop legend, a declaration of independence. Big U, meanwhile, pivoted. He launched Developing Options, a non-profit focused on community programs and anti-violence initiatives. Publicly, he became the reformed figure, the man who'd left the streets behind. But to those who knew the history, the tension never disappeared. Whispers began swirling again. YouTube documentaries, street interviews, people connecting dots that didn't exist, claiming Nipsey's independence came at a cost, that nobody leaves Big U clean. There was no proof, just shadows and speculation. But in Los Angeles, rumors spread faster than bullets. By the late 2010s, Nipsey and Big U were living parallel lives, two kings ruling different kingdoms. Nipsey was cutting ribbons on new businesses, meeting with the mayor, speaking about tech investment and community growth. Big U was managing artists and working with city programs, still respected, still feared. But even in death, the distance between them never closed. When Nipsey was murdered in 2019, every old theory came back to life. People remembered that parking lot. They remembered the split, and they started writing their own endings. It didn't matter that Eric Holder was convicted. The myth was stronger than the truth. Online forums, street podcasts, and conspiracy channels all said the same thing. Big U had blood on his hands. That's the story Deshawn Walters believed. That's the story that turned grief into vengeance. And when he pulled the trigger on Jabari Henley in 2025, he thought he was avenging a hero. But what he really did was repeat the same cycle Nipsey spent his life trying to break. Because in Los Angeles, the line between love and hate has always been paper thin. And once it tears, the damage ripples through generations. In Los Angeles, stories don't just travel. They multiply. Every rumor becomes a version of truth. Every whisper becomes a headline. And by the time anyone tries to set the record straight, the damage is already done. That's exactly what happened here. Because Deshawn Walters didn't just kill a man, he killed an idea. The idea that Nipsey Hussle's message could survive without distortion. When Judge Maria Lopez handed down the sentence, she said something the city would never forget. To invoke Nipsey's name while committing murder is the ultimate betrayal of his legacy. And she was right. Nipsey's entire mission was breaking the cycle, to prove you could rise above the streets, create ownership, build peace, and turn pain into progress. Yet in a cruel twist, his name had become the justification for more bloodshed. Online, the chaos didn't stop. YouTube channels rushed to upload breakdowns of the courtroom confession. Twitter exploded with theories. Some praised Walters as a soldier. Others condemned him as lost. Everyone had an opinion. No one had peace. Meanwhile, 3 families were left in ruins. The Henleys, mourning a son who was finally turning his life around. The Asgadoms, reminded all over again of the hole left by Nipsey's death. And the Walters family, now carrying the unbearable weight of a son sentenced to spend most of his life in a cell. Each of them became victims of the same story. A story twisted by years of online narratives, half-truths, and emotion masquerading as justice. And for Los Angeles, it forced an uncomfortable question. At what point does telling the story become fueling it? Because make no mistake, the internet didn't just report this tragedy, it helped create it. Posts, comments, videos, all feeding each other in an endless loop of outrage and speculation until someone decided to act on fiction as if it were fact. As the courtroom emptied that day, Big U stayed silent. No words, no reaction. Just a hollow stare on a video monitor. Maybe he was thinking about his past. Maybe he was thinking about his son. Or maybe, for the first time in his life, he realized what the streets had really taken from him. Everything that mattered. Outside, people still debated whether this was revenge or justice. But inside that father's silence was the truth that nobody wanted to face. That the stories we tell can destroy us. And yet, even after all the heartbreak, all the blood, one question still lingered. If this story began with loyalty and love, how did it end in conspiracy and death? The answer lies in what happened next, a reflection not just on these men, but on us all. In Los Angeles, the sun always rises, even after nights that should have stopped the world from spinning. But when it rose after Jabari Henley's murder, it didn't bring peace. It brought questions, because this wasn't just a story about revenge. It was a mirror showing how loyalty, pride, and misinformation can twist everything we think we know. 3 men, 3 paths, 3 legacies forever tangled. Nipsey Hussle, the visionary who turned struggle into purpose, preaching ownership and unity. Big U, the survivor who built an empire out of chaos, trying to transform his past into something better. Deshawn Walters, the believer who mistook conspiracy for truth and devotion for duty. None of them started as enemies. But that's the danger of stories left unfinished. Other people start writing the ending for you. When Nipsey said, "The marathon continues," He meant perseverance, growth, community. But somewhere along the way, those words got hijacked, twisted into a call for vengeance. The same slogan meant to inspire now echoes under murals, where candles melt on sidewalks still stained by loss. Big U once said in an interview, "If people knew what really happened, they'd know it was love. But love and pride don't mix good in the streets." And maybe that's where it all went wrong. Because in South Central, love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's possessive, sometimes it's violent, sometimes it's just another word for control. Jabari's death wasn't just one man's tragedy. It was the bill coming due for decades of unfinished business. For the grudges never buried, the pride never swallowed, and the rumors that never died. And now, as Deshawn Walters sits behind bars serving 35 years to life, he has nothing but time. Time to realize that his act didn't honor Nipsey's name. It buried it deeper in blood. The real justice won't come from another sentence or another confession. It'll come when people finally stop mistaking violence for loyalty. When the next generation understands that the streets aren't a destiny, they're a warning. Because Los Angeles doesn't need another legend made from tragedy. It needs survivors, builders, dreamers, the kind of people Nipsey tried to raise. So maybe the marathon does continue, but this time it's up to us to decide where it's running, toward more revenge or toward the peace he always preached. Either way, the story isn't over, and the city, the music, the legacy will never be the same again. In the end, Los Angeles doesn't stop for tragedy. The city keeps moving. Neon lights flicker back on, freeways fill again, and somewhere in Crenshaw, a mural fades one shade lighter under the sun. But beneath the noise, something has changed. Jabari Henley's death wasn't just another headline. It was the echo of decades, of loyalty turned obsession, of brotherhood twisted by pride, of stories too powerful to control once they leave our hands. Because that's what this really was, a story, one that began with love and ended in blood. Nipsey Hussle wanted to show the world what peace could look like when built from pain. Big U wanted to prove that redemption could come from the same streets that made him. Deshawn Walters believed he was honoring both, and instead he destroyed everything they stood for. That's the curse of loyalty without truth. When you fight ghosts instead of facts, you lose yourself before you ever touch the trigger. So the marathon does continue. But the question is where it's running now. Toward revenge or renewal? Toward the next rumor or the next rebuild? Maybe the lesson isn't in who pulled the gun or who paid the price. Maybe it's in what we choose to believe, and how easily those beliefs can burn a city down. Los Angeles doesn't need more martyrs. It needs memory. It needs mercy. And maybe, just maybe, it needs silence. Long enough to finally hear the truth beneath the noise.